Welcome to the Logosphere. This is Chris Stites, here as always with J.D. Roof.
Hello, good evening.
And today we're going to talk about psychedelics in sobriety.
It's an interesting topic.
It is. I guess it should be mentioned that we both live sober lifestyles. And we've both done psychedelics.
Lots of psychedelics. Mountains of them.
Not both of us have tried to do both simultaneously.
No, that would be an interesting experience. I think, maybe in another lifetime.
And by simultaneously, I mean not together, but try to be sober and do psychedelics at the same time. It's an experiment that I think one of us has run more than the other.
Yeah, you had an experience with it, and it's something. The reason why we wanted to make this a meditation on psychedelics and sobriety, or in trying to live a sober life, is that there's the John Hopkins study going on, and the psychedelic door is being reopened. It was kind of banned, back in the 50s, 60s, I believe. And it was kind of like considered the devil drug and all this stuff. And now they're realizing that there's some really, really strong therapeutic benefits for people with trauma and, mental illness.
What do you think about that? Do you think the world is finally coming around and we're being more accepted and open-minded of certain things which will help elevate the consciousness of our species? Or do you think we're just dipping our toes into another Pandora's box and, beware what's coming?
It's funny when you watch like a documentary like Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, and the description of mushrooms and mycelium and the forest floor and how it's all interconnected, and they can send messages like an adult female tree can send messages to its spawn trees, and it's almost like a description of God. And there is that theory that we were, kind of like a hominid type, monkey type creature, and we stumbled across some psychedelic, psychoactive plants or mushrooms, and it enhanced our thinking, and that's why we are what we are today. So maybe we're just a spawn of a mushroom.
Yeah, I believe they call the stoned ape hypothesis.
Yeah, the stoned ape hypothesis.
Yeah.
So, and big names are, I think the reason why so many people are flirting with it is big names are playing with this. Joe Rogan, a lot of these podcasters on the intellectual dark web. And it's interesting because, the studies so far, from what I can tell, it seems like it does help people with trauma.
Do you think that's a credible theory that, we all wonder why humans are so much more technologically advanced than other species?
Yeah, it's a tricky, for me, it's a tricky argument, because where does God fit into that?
How so?
It's just origin stories like Genesis and some of the.
You could even make that case that the Adam and Eve story of taking a bite from the apple, the tree of knowledge, is that some sort of nod to a relationship with a psychedelic substance?
Right. Yeah. And I feel like there is a little hoopla to that. There's this, I think some people want that to be true, just like a lot of people want UFOs to be true.
Yeah, it somehow feels like that as we're talking. I'm just waiting until we start to talk about ancient Egypt and
it's weird stuff like that. But I'll just start here. But my problem with it, when you have an alcoholic mind that is whatever makes you feel, in my experience, most alcoholics drink for the effect produced by alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. Or drug addicts take drugs because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And I know with my own experience of taking lots of psychedelics, including LSD and peyote and mescaline. I actually OD'd on mescaline one time. It was like poison from it as a high schooler. I like the effect produced by psychedelic drugs. I can tell you that, and an alcoholic mind, and I'm speaking from my experience, would probably like that and want to repeat it. And, the studies like the John Hopkins studies, that from what I've seen, they set up a clinical study where they take somebody that had that, somebody that is actually a candidate for the study. And it's usually somebody that's, suffered some kind of traumatic experience in their life. Maybe they're a drug addict, maybe they're not. and they go and they take one or two treatments, and they have, a medical staff that's kind of with them the entire time. And they're wearing headphones like this, sound deprivation. And they usually have a really fantastic, psychic change. And then from there on, they're not taking it, every other week as like a treatment. It's one or two times, and then that's enough. But I believe my biggest problem with it is with an alcoholic mind, an addictive personality. I know for myself that I would take it and have a good time and see the mother spirit or whatever, right? The ayahuasca mother spirit. And I want to go see her again. And I want to go see her on the weekends. And, when I wake up in the morning, when I go to, before I go to bed, and in the afternoon, and,
I guess there's this argument that not all drugs are created equal, and that some are more insidious than others. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's just the way the mind reacts to the drug.
Is the problem that it eventually, for an alcoholic, will likely lead to worse things, or that it will just use it in a way that is not appropriate?
The reason why I, in the last 18 years of my life, haven't experimented with psychedelic drugs anymore is that I'll probably end up worshiping it. Mm-hmm. I'll worship that experience.
So what do you think about people in recovery that end up, there's kind of a thing. There's
definitely.
There's a little bit of a movement, it's a bit taboo. Not everyone talks about it, but there's a small percentage of people who are in recovery and who are also probably, best case scenario, they're trying to do it above boards. They're trying to meet with a shaman. They're trying to do it with the right intention. They're doing it. What is the right intention?
Well, I mean, I would flip it right back on you, because you actually have a personal experience with that.
Yeah.
Having a lot of time sober, not ingesting drugs and alcohol, being a drug addict that, has problems when you do ingest, you can't stop. And so you ended up putting it down and getting sober and living a sober life and actually building a really good life. Mm-hmm. And you started flirting with that idea.
Yeah. And for me, it's, what happened, it's, on one hand, I think my intentions were mixed.
So you think you had bad intentions and good intentions?
Well, part of the intention is part of the intention of being sober, at least in certain ways, is to have a spiritual experience, to have an experience with life that is, not unmiraculous, where we're deepening our connection with something that's true. And that's somehow part and parcel with being sober for a lot of people. And so then it's easy to take psychedelics and say, well, these contribute to that as well, where maybe other substances don't, where, you use a drug like alcohol or heroin or cocaine, and there's a high and there's a come down, but it works a little bit more reliably than a psychedelic substance, where you kind of take it and it might be a bad experience. You might have a bad trip. Most meaningful trips are bad at some point. And it's actually the terror of them that produce the most meaningful, potentially long-lasting results. You sort of have to kind of go into the weeds, go into the belly of the beast, right? And come back out, and hopefully you've shed a couple layers of ego, I guess is the way they would, put it in, in psychedelic talk, that some of the ego is sort of shed, and as a result, maybe our consciousness is lifted. And, and then there's also the fact that you can't necessarily take psychedelic substances like you take other substances. I think you build a quick tolerance. You can't as easily take LSD every day and have an experience. There's the whole Silicon Valley tech bros who are microdosing, and that's a whole nother kind of trend.
Well, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Is people microdosing.
Yeah, people want to take small doses so they're not getting noticeably, intoxicated or hallucinating, but that it's, it's changing the way we think. It's opening our doors of perception.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I kind of think of that with like something like nicotine, even like a pretty benign drug, I would say, a stimulant.
Yeah.
And I always have, I don't smoke or chew tobacco or anything, but I have those lozenges, right? And I'm just like, I love those things.
Yeah.
I just munch those things all day long, and I have for years. And I hope to God they don't cause some kind of weird, deficiency down the road. But there is something about the nicotine stimulant that I feel like it makes me think better. Like it gives me kind of like a stimuli, and I can maybe get through like a tough problem at work or something. And it kind of keeps me alert, almost like caffeine.
Sure.
And I don't think it's hurting me, and I don't think it's changing my mood or my perception so much so that I'm like, physically dependent on it or whatnot. Right?
And with psychedelic substances, they're, apparently depends on which one you're talking about, but they're not very neurotoxic. You could take a drug like psilocybin, through mushrooms. It feels like you're getting poisoned, but it's not technically poisonous. It's not. MDMA is more poisonous to your brain. It's more neurotoxic, but, some of these other substances technically are very safe. Does that mean I believe that, that it's not without hazard? Of course not. I've experienced the hazard.
Yeah, because
part of the hazard for me was, there's the slippery slope idea. There's also, because it's controversial, then you end up having to potentially live a life where you're not being wholly transparent, right? You have your little secret that, maybe some of the people in your inner circle know, but for people that think you're sober, you wouldn't share that openly generally because it's not completely considered to be sober by most people. So it creates maybe a dishonest thing, But for me, I think mostly it wasn't necessarily the substances, but it was some of the things that I ended up confronting afterwards that I was ill prepared for, probably because psychologically I was a bit destabilized.
Yeah. Your world, chaos fell out from the floor on you. Yeah.
It's just like an Alice in Wonderland, like trip down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
We all have to do that to some degree in our lives, but we better be careful not to go too far.
Yeah, and I just feel like with a mind, I can only speak for myself, but we work with a lot of people that are drug addicts that are trying to, recover and, get sober, quote unquote. And that slippery slope thing, I think it's a monster with that type of obsessive mind, Yeah, if the story was different and maybe you were going through your dad's death and you just took some psilocybin and had a shaman walk you through and you got through that traumatic experience and that was it, could you be claiming that you're still sober? Probably, but that's not the route you went,
But would there always be part of me that
thinks that your consciousness is kind of torturing you over it?
Yeah.
I think it just depends on your community too. Like if your surrounding friends kind of sign off on it, and you're not hurting people, or hurting yourself, then maybe it could work. But it's just I've yet to see a self-diagnosed drug addict alcoholic, right about face and be able to do that.
If you know someone who's claiming to be sober and who has done psychedelics, do you consider them to be sober?
I think it depends on the surrounding group, right? Like I think we adapt to whatever group. Like if you're in,
but you personally, we just say Joe Schmo over there, sober 20 years, but we know that they did X, Y, and Z.
I know that's a tricky one because I think under my breath I'd be like, yeah, you're not sober, right? But I would probably to their face say, yeah, man, good for you, keep it up. But it really depends. I mean, because I know two shamans that they're not sober guys, but they they don't have problems with drugs and alcohol like me and you have kind of self-diagnosed ourselves with, and the trials and tribulations of that. And they use psilocybin and actually mostly ayahuasca. Sorry, they do ayahuasca trips, and they go down to South America and do it. And they do it like once a year, but for the most part, they guide people through it. They're kind of the shamans that guide, and they're trained in it. They're professionals, and they're some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. So I can't, if you were to fall into that frame, maybe you just don't claim that sobriety tag. It's kind of a weird, it's murky.
Do you know the Ram Dass story?
No.
So Timothy Leary, famous kind of pioneer of the 60s LSD movement. He was a professor at Harvard, and he started to experiment with psychedelic substances while being a professor. He was buddy-buddy with a guy named, I think, Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert is mostly known as Ram Dass. He wrote a book called Be Here Now. But anyway, they did their thing, and they both got fired from the university, from Harvard. They got fired for what they were doing. It was controversial. Timothy Leary in particular was like making a crusade out of it. Some people might argue that really harmed the psychedelic movement because you had this kind of, it was a tune-in, drop-out sort of idea. There was the counterculture, everything that was happening during the 60s and Woodstock and the Vietnam War. And, but what happened with Richard Alpert, I hope I'm getting his name right, is he ended up, like a lot of these guys, ended up going to India. Their whole spiritual trip they ended up finding people who were going over and meeting these gurus in India and doing the whole thing. And he met a guru that really impressed him and developed this relationship. Meanwhile, Ram Dass now was like bringing LSD. He was going on these trips across the country.
He changed his name. He transformed into Ram Dass.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah. But the story that he tells is that his guru kind of brought him aside once and said, "Can I have some of your medicine?" He kind of knew what was up. He knew that Ram Dass was this sort of like hippie professor who was rolling around. He had this thing. They didn't know what LSD was per se. He kind of says, "Give me some of your medicine." And, Ram Dass kind of ends up, hesitantly giving him some. And his report is that he took like a lot. And this wouldn't be your modern rave LSD. This would have been like lab created, pure LSD.
Liquid sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had reportedly took a lot. And what Ram Dass observed was that nothing happened to him, that he didn't have there was no effect on him. And that he says that he stopped taking it after that point.
Yeah, I see what point that made. It's almost like an argument. It's almost an argument in itself because you can. This is kind of Sam Harris talks about this, right? I've heard him say like you don't need to have some chemical, whatever, if it's LSD or if it's ayahuasca or peyote or spirits and wine, marijuana, which is THC, Delta 8, any of these chemicals that specifically come from plants, to get into a meditative state where you're kind of like totally present, like 100% present, and you're fulfilled, and you don't. It's not necessary to have to take this plant to get there.
Yeah. And
I don't know. Maybe I side with that side of it because that might be the longer route to get to peace, But it might be. It feels, for some reason, it still feels like if I have to ingest something to get there, it's not for me. It's not going to work. I'll get in the way of that, and it's probably better just to be completely off substances, and to have a devout meditation daily, and work my way there. Like the guru you were saying, right? He took the LSD and it didn't do anything to him
because he was already
there. He was already there. He was already present. He was spiritually connected. He didn't need a crutch to get there or a handicap to get there. So that, what I'm saying is kind of controversial towards that. It's almost like a traditionalist, like like clean up your room and like don't do drugs, Nancy Reagan type of thing. But I see the other side though. I see the other side because I think, when you've been in the groups, circles that me and you have been with for so many years, there's some people that you run into that have had such traumatic events, such like crazy stuff has happened to them. It's unbearable. And if there's a chemical or a substance out there that can snap them out of it and make them kind of uncover, discover, discard that in one trip. Like if what these guys are, John Hopkins is proving, like I think it's like a 70% success rate or something like that?
I was looking up the studies. The one that I read through that it gets cited a lot has to do with smoking cessation. The 80% they did a trial where 80% of participants continued to not smoke after 6 months. And these people were in their 50s. They had been smoking a pack a day for 30 years and had never been successful in quitting smoking. And with one experience with psilocybin, they were 80% of them were able to quit for 6 months. Whereas with, I think Chantix is the most successful pharmaceutical therapy, and it was 35%, I believe, and
they quit and stay quit long term.
It was 35% in 6 months, and it was 30% for like nicotine patches, but then psilocybin was 80%. What they, two things to take into consideration. One is that I think the sample size was 15.
Oh yeah, that's pretty too small.
It's small,
yeah.
And then the other thing was that it was accompanied with cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
So they didn't just take mushrooms; they took it, and then they were also enrolled in this program where they were getting weekly behavioral therapy around the smoking behavior.
Do you really need to go through all those hoops to really, do you need to take a drug to get off of drugs? You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like, I don't know, I just default to, I don't think I would be able to do it right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good for you. Maybe it's good for, society. But, and also one thing that came into my head was, do you think after all these studies and all this, when let's say all the research is done in 50 years from now, and they've done all these trials and they come up with concrete numbers, and instead of, a sample size of 15, they have a sample size of a couple thousand people, and they realize, wow, when hardcore smokers or tobacco chewers take psilocybin and do like one experience, 85% of them quit and stay quit for the rest of their life. This is a miracle, right? Oh, if, this many alcoholics do it, or drug addicts do it, 60% of them stay sober for the rest of their lives, right? It's just going to turn into a pharmaceutical thing that you go to CVS and buy to get off shit. It's just going to become another
product
on the shelf.
Yeah,
right?
No longer some mystical experience.
Right. I could see us doing that. I could see humanity doing that, trying to put it in a bottle, trying to put lightning in a bottle.
That's what we're trying to do.
That's what we're trying to do,
yeah.
Right? We're trying to find the lightning and the magic pill that will fix all our problems. And one thing that popped up, what you said on the sample size of the study you were citing, is that cognitive behavioral therapy was tandem with it. So it goes to this social thing that we have. We have to have this kind of logosphere. We have to talk.
Even if you could take, it's like the soma, kind of this elixir of the gods. If you could just take, if there was a pill that you could take and everything would be fixed, then would it be worth doing it? Whatever that means. That's a very vague way of saying it, but.
Well, didn't they try, isn't it called Antabuse or that?
Well, Antabuse was for alcohol. You take it and then you can't drink on it because
you get real sick, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that failed miserably in the alcoholic. So
it's still out there and people will still use it, but it's thought of almost as like a medieval therapy at this point,
right?
It's because there's something psychologically strange.
What's the heroin blocker? There's a heroin blocker.
There's naloxone or naltrexone, which is in Narcan. It's also in Suboxone. And so that's become a substance that's, Suboxone, which is naloxone and buprenorphine. It's a opiate blocker and an opiate, is this kind of modern, potential, elixir of the gods, cure-all. It sort of fixes you. It gives you a new drug habit and fixes an old one kind of in one breath.
Yeah, because I've seen some of these, the modern rehabs now. If somebody comes in and they're a fentanyl addict, which is like 90% of people right now, they give them that shot in the butt.
There's Sublocade.
It's Sublocade.
It's the most contemporary sort of. It's like Suboxone, but it's time released. So you get one injection per month, and it slowly.
One a month. That's the one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Vivitrol is the one that's just a blocker. So Vivitrol just prevents you from using most opiates and getting high.
So if you take Vivitrol in your body and you try to shoot up heroin or
nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, or there's a ceiling effect to it. Like you can kind of punch through, but it's going to be greatly diminished, or you'll have no effect. Because how it works is the opiate receptors in your brain, the neurochemical, I'm not sure the right lingo for it, that connects to it, this naloxone comes in and it sort of hangs out there. And it makes it so the opiates can't find a receptor.
Oh, okay.
And they just don't ever connect.
And then they just dissipate in your body.
Yeah.
Bloodstream, probably. Yeah. That's another interesting thing is like receptors in our brain, right? Like we've co-evolved to digest different compounds from plants, right? Like there's the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and that's for like CBD and THC. And that's why there's not really, I mean, I guess there are people that can have THC reactions that, they can, like, it's very, very rare.
Yeah, they can get sick. There's sort of an allergy to it, right?
Yeah, they can have like a certain allergy to it. But that's why there's no, like, not really like THC poisoning on a grand scale, because we've co-evolved with it. And so we have these receptors that are kind of built into our hardware that just, take it on. And then you just trip and then it goes away, and your body just processes it. So I guess you don't want to like take away from that, because we are from the earth, right? And we did co-evolve with these plants. And to just go, oh no, this plant's bad, no, that's like the bad, redheaded stepchild, stay away. I think that's foolish too. So I'm kind of in the middle of the argument. I really don't know which way,
Because then there's other plants too.
Yeah.
Most of these cocaine's
a plant, heroin. I mean, they're all, most of our medicines come from like tree bark and flowers, right? And it might be a synthetic version, but the compound, if you look on like a chart, like they look the same. It's not we're just making it on we're producing on mass scale. It's just I guess the one thing I keep falling back to is that the alcoholic mind, the mind that is obsessive, somebody that is truly, truly obsessive, can an experience like psilocybin actually curb that to a point where you're not obsessive like that. I wonder if that's a possibility, because then if that's the possibility, then it could be pretty groundbreaking, right? Yeah. But I mean, I always defer back to me. I would like it, and then I'd want to do it every year, once a year. Oh, I gotta go to my shaman retreat down in Brazil and go with my guy, and get sick and fucking trip, and then oh yeah, well yeah, that so it's just kind of, the year is kind of going by, and maybe I could do it every 6 months. I can see a mind like mine, and I relate my mind to other alcoholics in the world, just slowly trying to find loopholes. And then next thing you know, it's like, well, I got to do it once a month. And then, might as well smoke some weed with it, and it's that gateway kind of argument, right? And I don't know, I've never seen somebody really be successful that was a true drug addict alcoholic. Have you? Do you know anybody that you've seen?
Maybe?
Yeah. Who? Somebody that you know?
I mean, I do know some people that, that have.
But they're like true daily drinkers, like heroin shot, like they're just strung out. Their dick is in the dirt. You know what I mean? Like true drug addict, like just bar none.
I don't know. It's hard to really know, without being privy to that.
Right. I mean, they would almost have to do a study on that, and then you get into the ethics of it. Would that be like dangerous?
Yeah, if you're giving people with long-term sobriety psychedelic drugs.
I mean, we were talking about this before the
the big case study is
right. Bill Wilson, right? He, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he took LSD. You know more about that?
Yeah, he did it a few times, maybe over the course of a few years in the late 50s. He with Aldous Huxley, I just found out, was one of the people that was involved in that experience. And so a lot of people like to point to that, is you got Bill W., who's kind of the poster child for sobriety. And he, I don't know, when did he get sober? 1934, something like that?
34, 35.
So here we are in 59. That's like 25 years later, he's like dabbling, what does that say?
Well, what was his experience with it? I remember reading some excerpts from that I think it's in the language of the heart.
I think Pass It On it's mentioned
correspondence and stuff. And he talks about how he's still,
I think that overall he kept doing it because he thought it was promising. The most charitable, I think, interpretation is that he was doing it because he was trying to see how he could help more people find a spiritual experience.
Right. Yeah.
The basic tenet of Alcoholics Anonymous being that a spiritual experience is what's necessary to interrupt that type of alcoholic behavior. And so there was this idea that here's this substance that can produce something like that.
Yeah.
And that would be another question is there something like, say, the 12 steps and a psychedelic substance and the effect that produces? Is there something similar about those experiences? Do you think someone who's doing the steps is a more organic way that someone is trying to affect the same experience?
Yeah, trying to find some kind of understand philosophy of life to live, and then also have a spiritual radical change of their perception of reality. Because I mean, in my understanding, that's what the 12 steps are for. So it's it's almost like both sides of the fence are trying to do the same thing.
And so Bill W.'s going out there. He's a guinea pig for his people to see if he can discover this wonderful new way for people to find peace and contentment. Or is Bill just like trying to get a little free lapse in? He's like,
but see that culture,
I'm going in there with Huxley, and we're just like partying, and I'll write some articles about this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, Bill was like really just trying to.
Well, what's funny is that like that culture didn't really exist like it does today.
Yeah.
Right. So him going off and doing some experimental.
I think that's what happened. Probably is that the culture then took off the way it did, and he was like,
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the thing. The culture, I believe, would think like you're not sober, right? There's a side of people that would say no, like anything that affects you from the neck up, and you're not sober anymore. And that was created through his little birth child of the 12 steps and Alcoholics Anonymous. So is that kind of against this idea of taking psilocybin or ayahuasca and getting some kind of, trauma therapy for that, whatever it is.
And he was another guy, Bill W., if I'm not mistaken, was someone who suffered from depression, well into his life, well into his sobriety, 20 plus years. He was crippled at some points by depression.
Yeah.
So I think that's a case you make is if someone's sober, it's been a long time, but there's some warp in the psyche that just can't get unwarped. And it's debilitating. And if there's something like this that has the power to get the fork out of the garbage disposal that's just jammed in there, then is it justifiable to do it?
Right. Do you think it's justifiable to do it in sobriety?
Dude, I don't know. I always go back to I mentioned to you the Carl Jung quote that gets thrown around, which is something like, "Be careful of any wisdom you do not earn."
Oh yeah, see, that's a Sam Harris kind of thing too, right?
Sam Harris is pro. He's ultimately
pro.
He's pro,
but he also kind of with caution.
Yeah.
Same thing with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
He's interested. I know he's interviewed the John Hopkins guy a couple times and some of those doctors.
Yeah.
He's still a little on the maybe not, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Let's get some more results. Let's get some more statistics and see if it really works.
But that idea of be careful of any wisdom you do not earn, I kind of feel like even the people that have an experience, they get dialed in, they see something, it changes the way they respond to the world.
Yeah.
There's always something a bit artificial about it. Maybe that's me just being a purist about things, but
artificial in that it's because it just came from a plant in the ground, because that's not artificial, right? That's a plant, right? Like
but something is still added. There's something.
There's a chemical added.
Yeah, so that you're seeing something, but you're still seeing something that is only available because of a substance you took, which is changing your
perception.
Yeah,
it's forcing a perception change.
And then there's all the stories with things like LSD and the Manson family and cults, and it can get weird.
Well, we know it can get weird.
Yeah,
I mean, because we know from our own experience it gets weird.
Yeah.
But I just know from my experience with psychedelics and many different ones that I didn't expect myself to want to repeat it over and over and over again, like in a real unhealthy way.
You didn't want to, or you?
No, I did.
Yeah.
I did. I got to a point where
I know we want to all want to have our like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas fantasy.
Yeah, well, I was obsessed with that.
There's just
that was when I was a kid.
We all wanted our own little briefcase, right? With the adrenochrome and just wandering around.
That movie,
different.
He's like, oh, what am I going to do about these goddamn bats?
Yeah,
and he's like swatting bats.
Why didn't we all want that? I mean, not all of us, but I agree. That to me, that sounded like a fantasy.
It is
to a sane person, it should seem like a nightmare.
And it is a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I feel like certain minds know it's a nightmare. I almost know it, but I want to walk into that nightmare.
Yeah.
I want to experience that.
So interesting, right?
It is interesting. And he was Hunter Thompson.
Yeah.
He was an interesting writer too.
Yeah.
He was just a wild dude, But I was obsessed with that.
It's like magic to some extent, right? How can the perceived world and all the things that you rely on to happen and for you to experience can be so altered,
radically
altered.
Yeah.
Just the way that you think, the things that you see,
I had an experience where I took mescaline for the first time. Maybe So like I've taken LSD, I've taken mescaline, I've taken mushrooms, I've taken a lot of different things, and not responsibly, right? And I was a young chap, and I for some reason there was these things going around town that were cut with mescaline in them, and it was ecstasy, but it really wasn't ecstasy. It was like a mescaline thing, and I don't know where they came from, but me and a couple buddies, we called them Riddler's Revenge. That's what we called them, and they were hot in the early 2000s, late 90s, and so we started taking them every day, right? And you build a tolerance to it, right? And I remember the first time I took mescaline, I was at a house party, really nice house, beautiful place, big backyard sprawling out. It's like a fantasy place. And it was a big house party. The parents were out of town. And I take this mescaline, and at first I didn't know it was kicking in, right? That's the interesting thing about taking psychedelics is you take it and it's almost like you forget about it right away. It's like a weird thing. It's like, oh, it's not working. Oh, it's not working. Yeah. Maybe I should take another one. Maybe I should snort another line or whatever. And so I think I took 2 of those pills, which is probably way too much to take for a first timer. And suddenly the whole world like tilted into a different color. It was almost like a shift. And I remember reaching out, and it was like I opened up a window out of the air in front of me and stepped into an alternate reality. And it was just different colors, and people's faces looked different. I mean, some people look like creatures and animals. I mean, it was it was wild. Like, and I remember it because sometimes, when you go on a trip like that, sometimes you don't remember it. But I remember this vividly about this window that I walked through, right? And I stepped into it, and then my spine got all messed up, and I couldn't like move my spine, and I was like all like contorted and stuff, but I was loving life, and I was just there. And yeah, it was, I mean, compared to like LSD was kind of like fun and, like introspect, I was thinking a lot, and mushroom, same thing, kind of similar. I mean, LSD was a little bit more extreme, but mescaline was a wild ride, man. And I was so hungover. I mean, I was deathly sick after, and then we would just go do it again the next night.
I'm sure whatever you took
it was cut with stuff. Yeah. I think it was cut with heroin and some other crap.
MDMA or something.
Yeah. MDMA probably too. But, it was a wild, wild experience. And, I wanted to repeat it. I was full-fledged into it then, and into, drinking and using drugs daily. And it was one of the most radical experiences. To this day, I'll never forget it, and I don't think I got any spiritual advice in that state of mind. But it just shows you how powerful a drug like that can be,
Like now there's, ketamine has taken on a...
Well, that was your jam.
Yeah, that was my jam. But I mean, you see it, you could just go on social media and use, ketamine therapy, S-ketamine, there's inhalers you can get. You can, use some website and they'll send you a thing, and it's
from China.
I don't know about that, but either way, it's, but ketamine is one that produces
But you were saying there was ketamine clinics.
There are, yeah. They're around
for heroin addicts?
No, for depression. So ketamine is, I think it's approved now. I don't know if it's FDA approved or where it exists, but it's essentially this therapy that is being used for people that have medication-resistant depression. So someone is depressed clinically, they take a SSRI for a period of time.
Yeah,
serotonin reuptake, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And they take one of those and it works or it doesn't exactly. And you have to try a few therapies. And if then you can get approved to do ketamine therapy. And it's almost similar to another one. There's, what is it? TMS. I don't know what TMS stands for. Transcranial magnetic stimulus or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's a type of treatment with your brain where they use magnetic waves, and it's something for people that have severe depression. What they used to do is they used to perform lobotomies on people, and then
flew over the cuckoo's nest.
And then and then maybe to less severe extreme, they would do electroshock, or what I think what's called electroconvulsive therapy,
right? Which
still exists.
McMurphy. You remember that movie?
Yeah.
Have you read the book?
Yeah, I do.
Man.
Yeah.
What a great flick. What a great story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also famous 60s kind of counterculture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he was a big acid guy too, right?
Yeah.
Big, yeah.
Well, it's Ken Kesey.
That's right. Yeah.
But so something like that, it's, they'll do and it's still, I think it's considered actually to be, despite its scarlet letter that it's received, electroconvulsive therapy can be really effective for certain people. It's like almost like a shock, literally a shock to the system when your brainwaves are just like in a weird cycle. You got to it's almost like your heart. If your heart gets into a weird rhythm,
it's like a restart.
Yeah, they'll restart.
Yeah.
So ketamine now has become a drug that's growing in popularity for people who are like really suffering from depression and trying to find some relief on it. But now you can get, I'm sure you can get it approved more. There's more clinics. It's gaining popularity. It's showing all this efficacy for depression.
But isn't that the route you went? Isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. You thought maybe, I'm depressed.
Yeah. So that's the justification is like, look at all the studies that are coming out and it's legit. And you think like maybe this is, it's like an LSD to some degree that you can take every day.
Right.
You still develop a tolerance, but not to the same extent.
Yeah.
And it doesn't produce a bad trip to the same extent. You take LSD and you're kind of just launching a ship into space and it could go, in a lot of different directions. But something like ketamine, it's a little more reliable. You do it a certain dose, you get an experience. They call it hippie heroin in some circles.
That's the term.
Yeah.
I've heard.
It kind of is like a downer. It's ultimately a dissociative. It's an anesthetic. It's an anesthesia, right? So.
It's for horse.
They call it horse tranquilizer.
But it was for horses to calm them down.
But it's for people. You can get it in clinics. For if you're getting your wisdom teeth pulled out, there's some people that will use ketamine. It's used in veterinary clinics as well, just as an anesthesia that doesn't suppress your breathing. For a lot of anesthesias, they use opiates actually in conjunction with benzodiazepines.
Right.
And opiates especially suppress your breathing, so it can be dangerous for certain people that are really susceptible to the dangers of suppressed breathing. A drug like ketamine doesn't do that, so it's an alternative. But it's a dissociative drug. It's a lot, actually, not maybe a lot, but it's very similar to PCP. So PCP has a reputation for, people smoking it and then getting all crazy and
getting wet, getting butt naked.
Yeah. But it's
training day.
Yeah. So, but I think technically it's got a lot in similar with ketamine, and then dextromethorphan or dextromethorphan is DXM. It's a cough suppressant. You can buy it in any like Robitussin.
Oh yeah, I used
Chlorocidin.
Yeah.
You take super high doses of that, and it also produces in its own unique way a similar effect.
Yeah.
But it's it's psychedelic in some ways. It produces these insights,
visions.
This access to other other dimensions almost that can be very, seductive.
Now, do you think? But now this is interesting. So when you take a psychedelic, when you take ayahuasca or any of these, right, and you really are tripping, do you really think you're tapping into a different dimension?
Yeah.
Or do you think you're just an animal that took too many drugs? It's like having a nightmare.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which one is it? Because it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah, I guess one
Or is it
argument,
the mix of that.
one argument is that it's, there's, I guess with perception, you could make an argument that a lot of what our nervous system does is it actually inhibits things that we perceive. There's so much out there to be perceived.
Oh, right. Yeah. All different ultraviolet rays. And
we wouldn't even be able to handle the overload of information. So a lot of what our brains do is they act as inhibitors.
Filters. Yeah.
And so you could say, well, maybe a substance like this, in a way, it's disinhibiting your brain from the, the filtering that it normally does. And now you just have an access to a greater breadth of reality.
Do you believe that? How would you ever prove something like that?
I don't know.
Right? Like I
qualified for that.
But I just don't know. Yeah. If our brain is inhibited to a point where we're just raw onion to the world and we don't have any filter, are we going to really find out like how ugly the world is, or are we going to find out that it's this beautiful, bright world with all these, or
are we going to find ourselves somewhere beyond good and evil?
Yeah. But going back to it though, I think there is some merit to the ape. What is that?
Stoned ape hypothesis.
The stoned ape hypothesis.
Speaking of Nietzsche, though, thinking about him a little bit.
Oh, you're trying to swerve into Nietzsche? Just get in there. I love it though.
Well, dude, there's the other angle, which is like the Eleusinian mysteries, the immortality key.
Yeah,
people are interested in.
Yeah, that's what the Catholic Church did. We both, just for anybody, we both read the Immortality Key a couple months ago, and it's this lawyer, and he's friends with the John Hopkins guy. I can't remember that doctor's name. He was the guy that was on Jordan Peele. He's the one that's running the study, and he's getting the 70% smoker quitting results and stuff. And this lawyer decided to investigate the Eleusinian mysteries, and he was looking for the graveyard beer that like the Vikings and some of these ancient tribes and stuff used for or spiritual shamans used in ancient antithesis, and he's just this lawyer. He's never taken ayahuasca. That's the interesting thing about that book is he's not like a proponent. He's a proponent for it, but he's not a user.
Yeah, most of the users are like Terrence McKenna, and they're in the culture.
Yeah,
and they have agenda. This guy's kind of just a nerd who got interested in this topic, and
he's smart. He's dedicated, and he goes over to Europe, and he like goes to the Vatican. He finally gets like under the skirt there, and he finds out all these kind of almost like Salem witch trials over here, but over there. It started over there, and it was brought up over here, and how these ancient what was Dionysus, the god, the Greek god of the what was he the Greek god of?
Well, of like they say of wine, of intoxication. It's kind of passion. There's Dionysus, and then there's
the cult of Osiris, or cult of
Osiris was the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Is it Apollo? Dionysus.
Dionysus is the one.
Yeah, but I think there's Nietzsche in Birth of a Tragedy talks about the Apollonian and the Dionysian, these two different like modes, Dionysian being one of passions,
right.
Apollonian being one of logic and of truth and of reason.
Yeah.
And there's these two sort of narratives that that are important. But I think they call it the pagan continuity theory was the name of this idea.
That's it.
It's just kind of this trippy idea that Christianity as we know it really is kind of a carryover from this ancient like pagan mystical fertility cult. And
that worship Dionysus, basically. Yeah.
Eleusis, they would have this once a year. All these ballin' like Greeks would roll up to a cave. Plato was one of them.
Yeah. Aristotle,
Commodus.
All these guys.
Marcus Aurelius. And they were all going over there, and they were hanging out, and they were, and so they were having these rituals. But the theory is that they were taking a sacrament, and that sacrament either contained ergot, which contains lysergic acid, which is a precursor to LSD,
right?
Or psilocybin,
it was fermented,
or some sort of DMT, like elixir. And that part of what they were doing was they were just tripping. They were tripping balls
and trying to figure shit out.
And then that turned into, and then like Dionysus was sort of a prototype for Christ, and that ultimately it what we know as Christianity, and like the, even the, the like the Eucharist and the communion and, some of these things, like really when you had the Last Supper, they weren't, it wasn't a supper, like they were all
tripping
balls.
Yeah.
And that then the church eventually kind of were like, oh, let's like leave that part out. Let's keep in the part about where like you can't have sex and you're an original sinner, but like let's leave out the fun and the party.
Yeah.
All.
Well, one thing that was interesting about that book is towards the end, and this is a spoiler alert, but the first drug that was made illegal in America when, the Europeans were coming over here was, I think it was peyote, because that was the Indians' way of like getting, spiritually transformed or, like rejuvenated in a way and find their path. And they made that illegal.
Yeah. When their motive being what? Dangerous somehow.
It's dangerous. It's some weird pagan shit. Yeah. And that's interesting, right? Because, at one point marijuana was a cash crop. Like there, and alcohol is a big, most
There's
of the
theories about that too with marijuana, right? That in some ways it was illegalized because of its connection to indigenous populations,
right.
And that it was
right. And that goes into like conspiracy theories and whatnot, but it almost does seem kind of like the culture thing, tying it back with the kind of Bill Wilson's followers, how they would kind of stamp out this idea of, oh, well, why don't you go take some ayahuasca? You're sober a couple of years, but you just can't get over this one thing. You're still depressed or whatnot. And so why don't you get that extra spiritual help and go take some, go trip with a shaman and, go on your path and find the mother goddess and, that'll help you. And there's this side of that culture that stamps it down and says, no, it's not going to work because you have an alcoholic mind and you have an obsession. And if you do that once, you're going to probably do it again, even though you get sick from it. I mean, it's like eyes are open on that. I mean, me and you both know that when you ingest chemicals like that, you do feel sick. There's a gnarly hangover to it. A lot of times when you take, one of the first times I took mushrooms, I threw up right away. I put it in
ayahuasca is common for people to purge and
ill
and
like throwing up actually is kind of better. I was told this. I don't know if it's true, but I remember the first time I took magic mushrooms.
Just wait till you puke and then you'll really start to trip.
Yeah, that's what they'd say.
Yeah,
and it's actually, my experience is that it's true. I think I put them in a burger because I was trying to be cute, and I ate the whole burger, but I ate way too much. And it was, after like 40 minutes, I was just like, and I yarfed all over the lawn and at my house, and I was tripping balls after that, and I tripped for hours, so I don't know if there's some truth to that. There's probably some scientific thing to that.
I wonder, do you think that if anything, there's a better probability that you'd throw up undigested material that contains
the chemical?
Drug?
Yeah, exactly.
Most likely, have a smaller effect.
Or if you drink orange juice, remember that one? Drink orange juice and it makes you trip harder.
Yeah,
everybody's like, everybody's drinking orange juice.
There might be.
Yeah.
Well, I think with ayahuasca, what ayahuasca is it's it's one plant that contains DMT is an active ingredient.
Yeah.
But the thing with DMT is you can't ingest it because your stomach digests it before it can be metabolized.
So the acid.
Yeah, so that's why if you just do DMT, people smoke it. Like if you go to like a rave and people are like, want some DMT, bro? It's in a little bag with like aliens on it, and you smoke it like it's meth, like out of a pookie, and you have a real quick, powerful experience.
Yeah.
But when you take ayahuasca, it's the same drug, but in order to be able to consume it orally so that it lasts longer, instead of 10 minutes, it lasts for hours.
Right.
There's another drug, which is an MEO inhibitor, which basically
you take with it, right?
It suppresses the enzyme. It inhibits the enzyme, which otherwise
would just digest it and get it out of your system.
So then some people kind of freak out and go, how did these ancient,
figure that out?
People discover, this, combining this plant with this vine and at this temperature, is this what's needed to make that all happen?
Yeah. That's some ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
What's our consensus?
I don't know. For me, I think for me, my consensus is I'm glad that I did it. I'm not glad that I ran the experiment in sobriety, but I'm glad that I had some experiences with psychedelics
Yeah.
just period in life. I think even Sam Harris would make that argument that at the very least, it just opens your mind up to things that could be possible,
right,
that you wouldn't otherwise even entertain.
right.
But I think there's a quick ceiling to the efficacy of such experiences, and it's like diminishing returns, you know?
Right.
There's the magic, and then the more you chase the magic, the more that it gets perverted.
It's almost like you gotta switch the magic into relationships with people.
Yeah.
You gotta have good relationships with people. And if you don't have that cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's not just limited to therapy, but just
and the
community, whatever, family. If you don't follow up with that, if you with the transformational spiritual experience, you're F.
Most people are just getting it illegally and then doing it with their friends, hoping their parents don't catch them.
Yeah,
which is probably the worst way to do something like that.
Yeah.
So
but you know what? Even with that being said, I think I agree with you. I don't know if I've ever met somebody, and I've met a lot of people that have done all sorts of drugs, right?
They wish they didn't.
They wish they didn't. Everybody always said, that's an interesting point.
There's a little brotherhood that takes place.
Yeah.
And even when we were little pukes and we were running around with our friends and we were hoping our parents didn't bust us, it's kind of cool that we had our own little thing. Eleusinian mystery we were doing. It's like, dude, let's go and go up to the hill.
Yeah.
It was like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
You go to school the next day and you're kind of like,
and you're
person.
Like, and your friends are all like in on it, and it's like there's
probably something very old about that.
It's a much better experience. Even bad, I've had bad trips too, where like there was ghosts chasing me on, stuff like that. But, and I've been, deathly sick from it too, because I've taken too much. But it's much better than just, everybody crowding around a toilet, snorting cocaine until their noses are falling off. Like that's just not. It's not a real memorable, beautiful experience where you're just trying to get the hit every 30 minutes because the high's coming down. You're trying to chase the high. Doing like LSD or mescaline, in my personal experience, I look back at it and I'm grateful that I was able to do that with my friends, like and live, right?
So what you're saying is, if you're sober, you should continue to use them. Is what I'm hearing. That's what you're telling the audience.
I'm definitely not saying.
I'm saying interpreting for the.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there needs to be more research done on it. So I'm going to take the more conservative. Yeah, the more conservative approach. I think it is something that is not. You don't want to shut the door on it. I think there was a right about face in the '60s because of what it produced, and like love and peace and anti-war, Vietnam stuff, and it just maybe got caught in the wrong machine, but we don't want to turn our back. I mean, we're talking about ancient wisdom, it really is. And if interacting with chemicals or co-evolving with these plants is the reason why why we can have this talk, we can't turn our back on it, right? Like we can't turn our back. I'm grateful that I've done it, and I've met every person I've ever met that's done LSD, good or bad experience, is grateful that they did it. That's weird.
And it's probably a good thing that we're researching it again. Still now you see these advertised like at-home psychedelic therapy kits where they'll send you some mushrooms and a little mask and you can sit there and you can have your trip. I feel like that it's probably going to go terribly wrong in some way or another, but
Yeah, it's weird. It could. That's the problem. It could take a couple bad apples that could really screw it up. But I don't know. I think if somebody is struggling with drugs and alcohol, that they should definitely stay away from all drugs and alcohol and seek, help. Right? Like whether it's
the public service announcement at the end.
This is the public service announcement. Because. Speaking from experience, I'm speaking for you too. We both have suffer from this malady, and it's serious, and it takes lives, and it's something that you can't tread lightly, So maybe just proceed with caution with that kind of stuff. And I'm still not fully decided, right? I think there's a benefit to it. I just think it's yet to be seen.
Okay.
All right, everybody.
There you have it.
Have a good night.